marked to market and margin. Now in the previous section we looked at an over-the-counter transaction and had a look at what credit risk could come about. Now we're going to consider exchange-traded contracts. Remember, contracts traded with an exchange are actually designed to eliminate credit risk. First of all, because the exchange itself becomes counterparty to each trade. So if you've bought a contract, you don't have to worry that you don't know who the seller is. In fact, it is the exchange who's your counterparty. Second of all, this credit risk is eliminated through mark-to-market processes and how this assimilates in the margining process. So let's consider that there's a contract being established, an exchange-traded contract with a fixed price of 100. Now, as we've identified, if the price drops of the current market, well, that means there's more risk. Or, well, the value of the contract you're fixed at is higher than the current market, and this will reflect as a negative. If the market rises, well, now there'll be increasing in values. Notice how, on a daily basis, as this mark-to-market value changes, how I've reflected it in a margin account balance. And this is the key to eliminating credit risk, really, because margin accounts are held to reflect each mark-to-market value on a daily basis. So let's have a look at a trade and understand how from one day to the next, the market value and how that will reflect in the margin account. Remember, all trades on exchange are matched. So if there's a client A who has bought the contract at 100, they'll be matched by a client B who has sold the contract at 100. This is obviously when the market price is at 100. Now consider that the market moves to 95. The client who has bought the contract will obviously now have a negative value. They're obliged to buy at 100 when the market is lower, and this is reflected as the mark-to-market difference of -5. Client B, who was the seller, has a corresponding and equal value, but it is positive. They were obliged to sell at 100. This is 5 better than the current market of 95. The next day, the market moves to 92. Well, now this is an additional 3 loss for client A. And in fact, if this contract at this stage was closed out, they would have a total of a -8 loss. Their contract, compared to the current market, would be 8 worse. But of course, the next day trade takes place. And in our example, rather than continue lower, I've used an extreme price action where the market bounces higher to 116. Now, the difference from 92 to 116 will be reflected in client A as a positive 24 mark-to-market movement value. Client B will have this as a negative. Now, let us suggest that they are closed out now and they've met their maturity value. The total of values in client A will be positive 16, and the total in client B will reflect the net moves from 100 to 116 of down 16 because they sold the contract. Now, these mark-to-market values are actually reflected in the margin account. When both client A and client B initialized the contracts, they placed initial margin, and both of their margin accounts would have gone up by the value of 50. Now notice how each of these mark-to-market values are assigned to the initial margin account, and by closing day, client A has 15 higher than the initial margin, and client B 16 lower. It is by this process, this margining process, that the exchanges are able to eliminate default risk. Well, who would default and when? Let's have a look. They both locked into a price of 100. Client B sold at 100, and the closing price was 116. This client might decide to, well, ignore its obligations if that were even legally possible, and they might look to default so that they could sell at the higher price, the 116. But if this were the case, this would have negative effects on the client B, obviously, who could now not buy at 100, would have severe default implications. But because the margin account is reflecting that minus 16, it is there to offset any of the profit due to client A. And it is under this process where exchange-traded contracts have credit risk eliminated through daily mark-to-market processes.